Sometimes we are asked to graph a function that's fairly close to one of our library of functions. One of the techniques that we can use to graph is called a reflection. This change is known as a transformation. For a reflection, you must multiply either the function by -1 or you must multiply each x-coordinate by -1. So if a graph is reflected about the x-axis, then y equals f of x will transform into y equals negative f of x. If a graph is reflected about the y-axis, then y equals f of x will transform into y equals f of negative x. And if you actually reflect about both axes, then y equals f of x will transform into y equals negative f of negative x. So we're going to take each function and we're going to rewrite it with the given transformation. One being reflected about the x-axis and one about the y-axis. So to do for the x-axis, all we're going to do is we're just going to put a negative in front of the function itself. So it's going to be negative x cubed. And that's it. Now to do about the y-axis, what we're going to do is we're going to take the function and put a negative in for x. So we're going to have negative x cubed. Now if you simplify this, a negative x to an odd power is just going to be negative x cubed. So in this case, reflecting about the x and y axis is going to be the exact same for this function here. Next, f of x equals the cube root of x. So again, we're going to reflect it about the x-axis. So we're just going to take our function itself and we're going to put a negative in front of the entire thing. And for the y-axis, we're just going to take our function and put a negative in for x instead. Now if we work this out, we're going to get the cube root of negative x, which in all honesty, if you simplify, it's just going to be negative cube root of x. So again, these two reflections will be the exact same. Now it's not always true for functions, especially when you add or subtract different things to it, but just as a rule for these without any transformation beforehand, these two just are the exact same. Next we have the function 1 over x squared. So we're just going to replace or put a negative in front of the whole thing. So negative 1 over x squared. And then to reflect it on the other axes, we're going to do 1 over negative x squared. And if you simplify this, negative x squared is just going to be 1 over x squared. So when you reflect upon the y-axis here, it actually just goes back to being the exact same thing. No real change. And so lastly, here, we're going to reflect about the x-axis. So we're going to put a negative in front of the entire function for absolute value of x. Going to look like that. And then to reflect it about the y-axis, we're just going to put negative x inside, which if you remember, the absolute value of a negative is just going to be a positive. So this could just be rewritten as absolute value of x. So here, there's no real change from the original to when you reflected about the y-axis. Now, what does it look like as a graph? Well, a lot of these came out to be the same, so we're going to do one that actually has a lot of difference, and that is the square root function. So when we look at this in black, that is the regular square root function. Again, all starting at 0, going through 1, 1, and 4, 2. Now, again, we have it in red, and that is reflected about the y-axis. When we reflect about the y-axis, all the x values just change sign. So if it's positive, it changes to negative. The y values don't change. The green one is reflected about the x-axis. So here, the same numbers are there, but the y values change from positive to negative, positive to negative. And this one you can actually see what it looks like when you reflect about the x and the y-axis, the one in purple, where all the signs flip. So positive x becomes negative, positive y becomes negative, same numbers, but all the signs flip. So when you're reflecting about the axes, typically only one number is going to change signs. If you're reflecting about the y, it's the x values. If you're reflecting about the x, it's the y values. And if you're reflecting about both, it's both numbers that will change signs.